Welcome to another episode of The Impact of AI, brought to you by AI Time Journal. Today, we'll continue to explore how AI is impacting our professional and daily lives. We are extremely excited today to have Susan Walsh with us. She has over 10 years of experience in spend analytics and data classification. And if you don't know her, she is also well known in circles as the classification guru, as the fixer of dirty data, the creator of COAT, C-O-A-T, that stands for consistent, organized, accurate, and trustworthy. She's also recently been on the TEDx stage in London, and she is soon to be a first author this fall. She has a book coming out called Between the Spreadsheets, Classifying and Fixing Dirty Data. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, this is great. This is going to be so much fun.
I know. We've known each other on LinkedIn for so long, so it's great to really chat.
Yeah. So I've listened to you speak quite a bit. I've read a lot of the articles and the content that you've put together. And I recognize that you've been doing this for quite a while, but it wasn't until the last 4 or 5 years that you pulled yourself out of industry and created your own company. I would love to really hear the story behind that conception.
Yeah, so I fell into spend analytics by accident when my first business failed, and I didn't work in the procurement world or the data world before that. But I really took to it very quickly. I found classifying spend data really natural. I really enjoyed it. And actually, I was pretty good at it and very accurate. And so I had a great 5 years working with the spend analytics company, but I kind of got as far as I could go there. But then I had this dilemma, well, I don't know where I can get a job doing this. I don't even know what this job is called. I'm not really sure what to do. So the options were really either start a business or give up and just try a new career. And I really wasn't ready to do that because I really genuinely have found something that I love doing. And so I set up my business with not one single connection in the world and started exhibiting at procurement events, trying to get my name out there. And then I realized pretty quickly that nobody was looking for me because what I'm offering is normally tagged on to another service. So when I worked at the spend analytics company, it was part of the dashboards and the reporting and the analytics. If you buy software, you might get it classified as part of the software you've bought. But I really felt when I was working at the spend analytics company that there was a real opportunity to offer just the classification and cleansing services, not the analytics part. And you got to remember, this was 4 years ago. At that time, most companies didn't have in-house analytics teams or BI teams. It was all outsourced. So I guess I was kind of ahead of my time. But it was really hard to get people to see me. So that's when I really discovered LinkedIn and the power that had. I started doing videos about what I did because I was finding it really hard to explain in a few words. Eventually I came up with Fixer of Dirty Data, which kind of nicely and succinctly explains things. So I started doing videos and posts, and really that's how I've grown my awareness and got to the point where I've written a book. I mean, oh my goodness. I don't really know.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, I really don't know anyone else out there that is doing what I'm doing and saying, this is our service, we just classify data.
You mentioned that you didn't think that people were seeing you, or that so it's an interesting point. Do you think because people didn't quite understand, even in corporate, spend analytics and the value of cleansing their data, or would you think there was another reason?
I think it's because people assumed that you just put it in the software and that it magically fixes it. That's I really think that was the belief. And I'm out here going, hey, guess what? I don't automate. I'm doing it by hand or by eye. And we're more efficient. We are more accurate, I would say, because we go through every single line of data. We know your data inside out. If you do it via automation, you don't get to know the data that way. So patterns are not that obvious. irregular spend is
Mhm.
not necessarily so obvious, or you might not look at the supplier as a whole. That the description might be misleading if it's out of context. So if it's like a supplier with 10 rows and one of the rows says services, if you don't know what the other 9 rows are, you might not know what the services are. But if you can see the data from the other 9 rows, then you can work out when you're classifying what it should be. That doesn't get picked up on the automation side. And I think, just generally, it's a kind of sweep it under the carpet. Let's not talk about data and the state of it. It's been underplayed and undervalued for a very long time.
All right, you brought up a lot there to unpack. So, okay, so at the moment, the industry is a bit hot with spend analytics, these classification applications. They're promoting machine learning, deep learning, grammar-based, natural processing, language processing. But I'm hearing from you that that's not, that I think what I'm hearing from you is that's not everything, that the hype says.
Yeah, absolutely. So the first thing is all of this AI, ML coding is based on existing data. Mm-hmm. If you haven't had somebody go through it and check it's okay, it's going to learn bad information. It's going to spread the dirty data. So you have to have somebody look at it before you even go into the analytics part. Mm-hmm. The other thing is, there's a couple of things. So classification in the spend data world is very subjective, and context is really important. So I might use DHL as a courier for my business, but a manufacturer will be using them for logistics, distribution, warehousing. It's a whole different range of services. So that one supplier is many things to different companies. How is the AI going to know that? Unless you feed it the right information. But how are you going to do that? You're going to need a person. So I think there's a bit of a misunderstanding in the wider procurement world that the AI and the machine learning will do it all, whereas actually I think it's very much more of a partnership between humans and an automation. So if, for example, you were told that by your third-party supplier that your spend data was auto-classified or automated,
right?
Just ask about what percentage is automated, because there's a huge assumption that if you tell someone that it's automated, it's 100%. You wouldn't doubt that. But having worked with AI and ML and neural networks, I've seen some really poor results. Like possibly, if you're lucky, you could get 40% accuracy and correctness with the data that is auto-classified, and then you have to work through the rest. But the reality is you still have to go through the whole data file again. So guess what? I just start from the beginning, do it myself. I've developed a methodology over the years. I use some really efficient software to help me classify, even though it's still manual. I'll finish at around the same point as the company that's using the automation and how to check it. And there's some really great ways that you can check if your data has been classified by a person or by, say, a machine or code. So you will often find that there'll be some kind of random classification. And one recent example was construction. So there's a whole load of suppliers, from facilities management to, legal services, consultancy, that were all classified as construction. And it was something to do with one of the words that was in the description. So if you notice random classification like that makes absolutely no sense, that's the automation. If it's something that's more logical, then that's been done by a human.
Okay, I actually have a story that I think that this resonates. So I a long time ago was also supporting some spend analytics, and the company was using a tool, and this was a telecommunications company, and part of their job was to lay the cables in the ground, for the telecommunications. Now, as a part of that, it was required that they also had security officers or police officers that were off work, off hours. And the insurance required that they had to be standing there to ensure that even though there were cones and signs, anybody walking around would not accidentally fall into the hole. Yeah. So when the data came back from these services, these security guards were actually misclassified as security services in a completely different bucket. Whereas from the telecommunications company, this was actually a part of the construction cost. So one of the things that happened, and I think I'm resonating with what you're saying, is once the data came back, it still required the company to go through all of the data and make sure it was classified accurately based on how the company interprets their core competencies. And I think that's what you.
Yeah. And actually, as humans, when we're working through the data, as these queries come up, we just ask the client as we're going along. So we don't wait till we get to the end and then it's all needs to be changed. But if there really was this all singing, all dancing classification tool out there, wouldn't everybody be using it by now? Wouldn't there be like a brand leader in the market?
Unless nobody knows about them yet.
Yeah. Could well be, and it will happen, it will get better, but I honestly think we're at least 10 years away from that, if not longer. We are not nearly at the level.
Okay.
So when you think it's at,
right,
there's an assumption we're a lot closer to it than we are.
So when you're out there talking to your customers and they're asking you some of the same questions we're asking you, how do you explain to them that everybody right now is talking about, the cognitive technologies within our artificial intelligence is augmenting the human behavior, being able to support the repetitive tasks. And so spend data classification does come with some repetitive tasks, but I'd be interested to hear how you're explaining to your customers where that gap lies.
So I've got a great example for you.
Yeah.
Just worked on a taxonomy for a client, helped them build it out. And I said, look, I used their existing classified data to build the taxonomy. I said, but look, I flagged a lot of misclassification here. Oh, don't worry, the AI is going to classify it all. That's great. And I said, but I haven't built the taxonomy yet. It needs to learn from data. How is it going to learn from a taxonomy that hasn't been built yet? It doesn't have any classified data with that taxonomy because it hasn't been built. How is it going to auto-classify it? I mean, I am very concerned about the quality of it because it's never seen the taxonomy. It doesn't know what it is. It's got nothing to learn from. What's it going to be based on? It would learn that supplier A is a lawyer, supplier B is a cleaning service, and supplier C does keyboards, mice, and monitors.
Right.
With the new taxonomy, so it might know it as the old taxonomy, level 1, 2, 3, but say the new taxonomy is level 1, 2, 3, 4. It's never seen those level 1, 2, 3, 4s before in other data. No data has ever been classified with those 4 levels.
So the existing data in this scenario is it got classified to the old taxonomy, which is not accurate.
Yes, so it learns from already classified data to classify future data. That's how it works.
Got it.
But I have the new taxonomy. Nobody else has seen it yet. It's not been classified using that taxonomy. So how can their system learn from something that doesn't exist yet?
So how did this story end?
I don't know.
Or has it? You don't know yet.
I don't know.
Oh, to be continued.
I have no idea. Yeah. So that's a really good example where they're putting a lot of trust in the AI just doing it.
Okay.
So I work across multiple industries. So for someone like me, it would be very hard to develop a tool that would cover all industries. But I think if you focused on industry specific automation, then you would have a more successful chance of getting it to work. So, in manufacturing, all your nuts, bolts, screws, that's all great. You can pretty much automate that. But then if you're in pharmaceuticals, you're going to need different things like antibodies, reagents, chemicals, lab equipment. And then if you are in a professional services company, it's going to be all about people services and professional services that you're buying. It's going to be less about pharmaceuticals or hardware. It's going to be more about buying people. So if you kind of focus on the industry, you can learn, it can be more accurate because it's learning from that industry rather than trying to, classify DHL across multiple industries. If it was just in one industry, then like manufacturing, it would probably know that it would be warehousing and distribution.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm putting my procurement hat on, and in thinking about that, so I got my procurement hat on. Next time I have to get a hat. But
I'll get you one.
Yeah, thanks. So I've got my procurement hat on, and now I'm listening and wondering, well, what do I need to know as a procurement professional? Because these procurement professionals are out there looking at all these different softwares. A lot of these salesmen are coming in and telling them that their AI is really slick and better than the other guy who has, similar AI. So as a procurement professional, what should I know? What should I be asking to ensure that I'm understanding how they're, what they're selling, but understanding the results I'm going to get out of it?
So I wouldn't go down the how does it work route, because that
Okay.
you're not going to understand that. I don't understand that.
Okay.
What I'd be looking for is what kind of state does my data need to be in before it starts? They should be telling you that it needs to be clean.
Okay.
You can't put it in dirty. It's just going to become out more dirty. It's just going to spread. And I've heard of stories of software implementations falling apart after spending millions of dollars because they didn't clean the data at the start, and nobody told us that you needed to do that. Oh, it was your responsibility to do that. But nobody said, So first of all, ask, does my data, what state does my data need to be in?
Mm-hmm.
Then I would ask, what percentage of the data is automated by classification? Because there's no way it's 100%. Well, I mean, obviously they could run the automation over the 100%, but the reality is there's a team of people somewhere in the world going and classifying a lot of it manually because the automation isn't quite right. And we were talking just before about confidence levels. I've seen 100% confidence levels of a tree classified as a dog, that kind of level of difference, So and this was a few years ago, so things might have moved on, but I have very little confidence in it working effectively right now, unless it's things like parts, nuts, bolts, screws. They are really good things to classify. Services can be quite tricky. And then if it says rent, well, if you're not sure what the supplier is that property rent? Is that equipment rent? Is it some kind of other, material handling equipment? So forklifts, it could be any kind of rental. Those kind of things, you need to set a standard for the AI to learn.
All right. So I was chatting with somebody recently, and they said, we went out and got a system who classified our data. We recognized that a group of people were modifying the data before it came to us. And then on top of that, the customer was asking us to look at the data. And then once it went through all these reviews, the idea is that it would get feedback from the internal company. It would get feedback from the individuals. And then finally, with all of that, it had the right set of rules that then going forward, it would be refreshed over and over again. But I what I'm hearing from you is that if they went to someone like you first and just made sure all the data was clean, then all these extra steps and having, a bunch of offshore people come in and manually reclassify the data, and then asking the client to come in and reclassify the data. I think I see what you're taking by. You from the time frame that you did your job was actually equal to the time frame that I just outlined here.
There's a lot more people involved and probably a lot more cost as well.
Yeah, that's a very valid point too.
And actually, just back to the question about if they come in with the AI, they should be asking, well, how is it maintained? How do we maintain it? Is that your responsibility? Is that our responsibility? Are you going to train us, our team, on how to classify?
Oh, what do you mean by maintain?
Because it's not just about... So something that I talk about a lot is the importance of maintaining data, because it doesn't stay in... Once you've classified it, it doesn't always stay like that. People can accidentally delete things. They can overwrite things. There's cut and paste errors. So you should be spot checking your data regularly just to make sure everything is as it should be. Or it might be refreshes. So in the next quarter, you've got a new set of data that comes in that needs to be classified. So are you just giving it to this company to classify? Or do you then have to do it yourself with the software they've given you? Find out what kind of forward costs might be involved in managing this data going forward.
Okay.
Because quite often I think it's, right, okay, here we go, we've classified your data, we'll see you later. But, well, what do you do next? Because there's still going to be more data coming in every day of every week of every year.
Okay.
So it's not just about what they're going to do for you right now, but what does the future hold? How are they going to support you?
Mm-hmm.
Or are they just going to leave you?
Okay.
And then you should be thinking about as well how you're going to manage that supplier. And you can do some really quick spot checks on data just to check their work in a pivot table. And you can search on keywords, things like hotels, taxi, restaurant. If you've got misclassification and things like that, then you've got a big problem. Mm. It might be something less subtle, or more subtle even, but you'll know your business and what suppliers should be a certain classification. So you might want to just check that they're okay.
Okay. I want to circle back to the confidence.
Yeah.
You briefly started to talk about confidence levels, and I've personally seen SLAs with some of these companies where they're saying that we're going to make sure that 97% of your data is classified, and then they'll come back and say, but we'll also ensure that 80% of your data is classified at a high or very high confidence. I'm interested what your thoughts are on that.
So like I said, I've seen 100% confidence that's not right at all. So technically, based on the criteria that's in the machine learning or the coding, it matches the criteria and it thinks it should be right based on what it knows. But as people, as humans, when we look at it it's out of context, it looks ridiculous. And I think there's classification is very subjective. We would classify the same thing as different options.
Yes.
So whose confidence is it? And do they really know your data?
That's a really good point.
Yeah.
Because I was just thinking that if you and I had the same set of data and did like an A/B blind test, that
different results.
I guarantee you, just from my experience and your experience has been different in the industry, I would naturally probably classify something different than you did.
Yeah. So I managed a team of 14 people who were home-based, all classifying. Mm-hmm. So the biggest challenge I had was consistency across that team. So we had lists of, if it's this supply, like Pitney Bowes, right, that should always be franking, or back in the day anyway, it was always franking, not finance systems, not, an ADP, that's payroll, but it could be financial software. Which one are you going to? So it's really important to get consistency across your team, your department, maybe even your company. And that's where the whole quote thing came from, consistency, get it all consistent, then get it organized, categorize it into regions, departments, divisions, so that you can say, right, how much are we spending with this supplier globally or regionally or in this division? And then you need to make sure it's accurate too. So, don't just trust the confidence level that came out of a computer. You don't know if that has been checked by someone or not when it comes back to you. You really need to check that. So make sure it's accurate. And then when you have those three things, the consistency, the organization, and the accuracy, you then have trustworthy data. So then you can really start to work with it, make some really good cost savings, find some opportunities, do supplier rationalization, even spot things like rogue spending. But if you've got random construction classifications in your data, it's going to mislead you. It's going to give you the wrong information. You could make the wrong decisions.
So let me think about something, because I want to dive a little bit deeper into your perspective of these grammar-based, technologies, because you made a comment that I understand what you were saying about the confidence level and everything's being subjective, which then leads me to believe that if I had a machine cleansing your data versus my data, or I had, you doing something versus a machine doing something, the definition of confidence is really me, the customer. So it's not just subjective in the way it's being cleansed, it's also subjective in, do I feel as a customer that that the confidence level is high, versus a different customer, their confidence level may be different because they see their data differently.
I think they don't really define very well what confidence means. Yeah, so it's confidence in the matching of whatever. It's not confidence that it's right necessarily. Right. It's just that it's matched confidently.
Okay. So go ahead.
I mean, things might have come along a little bit in the last couple of years, but that's certainly the confidence kind of levels I was working with were based on the criteria, not necessarily it being right.
So you've been doing this quite a while. Can you give us another story?
Oh, so, I mean, what kind of story? Do you want a good story, a bad story, a horror story?
Oh, let's do the horror story. let's do that one.
Well, actually, I should probably tease you because I have a whole chapter in my book. People have anonymously donated data horror stories to me for the book. So I've gone through and suggested how I would deal with these issues. But it's a lot of the time it's lack of investment. I just in the last 2 months, I have had 2 different people speak to me looking for my help. And they've come back to me and said either the business has no appetite to fix the data, even though they know it's wrong, or they don't want to pay for it.
Wow.
Yeah.
See, I always feel
rife.
I always feel like supply chain and procurement is the backbone of an organization, but data is the heart. I mean, if you don't have the data, the right data in the right format at the right time, then you're losing the ability to make informed decisions. You're losing your capabilities to make a decision that's going to provide the right action at the right point in time. Yeah.
So think about it like this. So I'm always saying data is an investment, not cost. If your data was to disappear tomorrow, what's the value of that to your business? Because it doesn't sit on a balance sheet, but it has a value. Like, what would happen to your business if your data disappeared tomorrow?
That's a really good question. That's a really good question.
That's the way we need to start getting the budget holders to think about data.
Yeah. So you didn't tell me the horror story.
So,
or you can tell me a good story. You can tell me.
Well, a good one is I've been working with a client and they didn't have really that much classified data before I started working with them. And actually this is more than one client. I've given them visibility on their spend so that they can make millions of dollars of savings, or they can, rationalize their suppliers. So for example, one client found that they had 1,000 consultants. So, let's chop those down. Just even finding out like what they were spending within each region, and actually some of the numbers being reported were wrong, and it wasn't from my side, it was from their side, but they didn't know that until we started doing the classification and doing the work. So it can pull out lots of like hidden surprises that they just didn't know about.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to go back to the question I asked earlier, which is, I'm in procurement. I've got several suppliers out there looking for a tool that can help me with the spend, classification. what are some of the things that they really need to be considering before they go out and spend their money?
So is it going to make your life easier? Is it going to give you what you need? So what do you need, first of all, not just for like today, but for 6 months and a year down the line? So that's the thing I'm always saying when I'm building taxonomies and classification. Let's not just look at now, but think about what you might need in the future. Does that tool fit with it? Does it fit within your budget? And are your team going to use it and adopt it? You know, is it easy to use, or are you just giving that away to another company to manage? And then if you are, do you trust that company with your data? You know, what is your acceptable kind of tolerance level of errors? And there's loads of things. So a lot of companies might only do the top 80-90% of spend, but that could leave thousands of rows of data unclassified. So, you know, are they doing everything? Are they doing just the juicy bits? Is it, you know, it's great having an automation tool, but is it going to classify everything, or is it just going to do the nice bits? Because that's not really going to help you, because we can all do the nice bits. And not every tool is going to be suitable for every organization. You know, there are, you know, different tools for different organizations depending on what you need. So it's about going out there. And actually for me as well, it's really important to get on with the people you work with, whether they're internal or external. You know, are they going to give you the support that you're going to need for this project?
That's all. I think everybody always misses that one. Yeah.
Yeah. Are they going to care enough for it to want it to work for you?
Yeah. I think you also brought up some other key points of note, which was asking the question around, you know, how much of the data is being classified. And, you know, the question specifically that I really liked was asking how much of the data is being touched by manual hands before it comes back to me as the consumer. And then also the follow on is the consumer or the customer also now being asked to go and reclassify and validate their data. I think that was pretty key, you know, during our conversation that if I'm the company and I'm saying I'm going to audit, you know, I've got this really cool tool that's got these augmented technologies and it does, you know, X, Y, and Z, but then I'm also telling you that they're going to have 2 weeks of touch point. And then, oh, by the way, we need to have you guys touch it for 2 weeks. I think that's the clear message to what you were talking about earlier. Is it really is it really automating your data if all those touch points are needed?
And what I'd say is, if it's the first time they've worked with your data, then yes, that's fine, because you want to get it right so that you start moving on with the right data. But if they're expecting that like every refresh, then that's not right. You get it right on the first round, and then you should be able to automate after that.
And then you also mentioned industry. So I think it sounds like one of the questions that should be asked is, I'm in the pharmaceutical industry. How many times have you guys classified pharmaceutical data?
That's a great question.
Okay. All right. Yeah, you mentioned that earlier, and I thought that was a really good one.
I can tell you, because I've been classifying it for years, about antibodies. Okay. So antibodies can be called antibodies, but they're also abbreviated to MAB. They could also be MAB rabbit or goat or human. Sometimes it's just goat, rabbit, or human. Now I know that because I've been classifying it for years, but you know, you might end up getting your antibodies classified as a goat or a rabbit.
A rabbit, an actual animal.
Yeah.
Oh, that's
yeah, you know, it's just little things like that.
That's a good
point.
Which
might seem ridiculous to us, but would be really important to a pharma company.
So it's not only the context of the words around the data in that line item, but it's also the context of what industry is this data coming from.
So baths, laboratory baths, water baths. If it just says bath, you might end up with the wrong type of bath.
Yes. Or computer mice versus white mice.
I've seen that as well. Yeah, really? I have actually seen that. Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah. Because nowadays, in most industries, if you had mouse in the data, it would be a computer mouse, but not in not in pharma, not and universities, education, higher education as well. They buy in a lot of lab equipment and supplies for their students.
That's a good point. I think that's probably a really good point. So now I'm going to start asking those questions. Yeah. I like that. Yeah.
Just probe a little bit.
Yeah. So Susan, is there, and this is just me asking you kind of offline, is there anything we haven't touched on that you want to talk about? Like something that was in your book that you wanted to mention, something else that you're really passionate about, that you keep seeing people make the same mistakes, and you want to use this platform to say, hey guys, this is what you guys need to be,
It's make sure your data has its quote on. So make sure it's consistent. And that can be things like liters. We're all global now, but we're spelling things in different ways. Date formats, which, are we European? Are we US? What's our standard date format? Be organized, categorize things. And I don't just mean classification of products, but by region, by country, by department, so that you can find it. Think of like going to get a top from your wardrobe. If you've got it all nicely organized, you can just pull it right out.
Mm-hmm.
But if it's just been thrown in there, it's going to take ages to find. It's the same with data. Imagine being able to pull a report in 5 minutes and not 5 hours, because you've already categorized everything in the groups that you need. And then it makes it trustworthy. But of course, it's not going to stay like that unless you maintain your data. That is so, so important. So things change over time. Things get accidentally deleted, cut and paste errors, or like classifications change, So what you classified something as a year ago might not be relevant for how you need to look at it now.
That I think is probably the most important thing we've highlighted today. So I tell customers, I tell organizations all the time, just because you're doing something today, the industry is constantly changing. Yeah. We're changing more now than we did, 5 years ago. And if you have processes in place 2 years ago, the demand from your consumers and the processes that you need today aren't the same processes you had, 2 years ago.
Yeah.
So, but I think what I'm hearing is taking that same concept, and if your processes are changing every 2 years, then your data that's supporting those processes should be changing every 2 years, or how you interpret the data.
Yes.
Right?
Or somebody leaves and a new person comes in and starts classifying things, and they have a different perspective on what this supplier A should be. So you've got maybe 2 years of classification with supplier A being classification A, and then you've got another year of it being classification B, because you haven't been checking your data set as a whole.
Right.
So there's inconsistencies there.
Okay. One thing that you mentioned that we completely forgot to touch on was global data. And I'm sure, when we're thinking about data, my brain is where I live. I live in the US and you live in Europe. And it just, I think we should probably highlight that data is not the same data everywhere. And classification of that data isn't going to be the same in the US versus Europe versus Russia versus, Australia.
Yeah, most companies do not have a single ERP or CRM system globally. They could have up 20 or 30 sometimes. Each system will come from a different country with different language, potentially, different dates. And so you need to know where the source is and make a decision before you start merging everything together. And then suddenly none of your PO dates add up because the date has been changed from Europe to US or vice versa, but not only in the delivery column, not in the PO column, and it can cause all kinds of problems. I think even sometimes months are called different things in different countries, and so it could be misleading. So you have to be really wary of that.
So what's the largest, this is like fun fact, what's the largest amount of data that you've ever worked on?
It's around the 3 million row mark.
Okay.
I did get asked to quote on a project that was 147 million rows of data.
Okay.
Number of countries? So I've definitely had a file with at least 90 countries and almost as many languages. So Yeah, there's most languages I know what cleaning means. And yeah, like what's the limpezza, and taxis, various different spellings of taxis in different countries, and flights. There's various words I know in many different languages.
That's funny. That's funny. All right. Well, we are coming to the end of our session today. Any leave behind thoughts?
Data drives everything now. It should be at the heart of what you're doing, and you should look after it like you look after your house or your hair or your nails or your beard if you have one. Mine's is not too bad at the moment. It needs nurtured and looked after, or it's not going to be useful.
Great. Well, thank you, Susan. This has been wonderful.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a great chat.